Jason.
Hey, Clairdee.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully well. It is great to just be able to sit down here with you.
As always with you, madam. Let's get started with a question about how did you get started in music?
How I got started in music, it was a family thing. My mother played piano and sang in the church choir, and of all of her children, she said, everybody's going to play an instrument,
Wow.
and you will sing in the choir.
I had just a very conscious family about loving good music.
Yes.
And there was always good music in the household, and I remember listening to the Jackson 5 and listening to just Parliament Funkadelic as a kid. Mm-hmm. But I really started playing an instrument around 8 years old. Okay. And saxophone was my first instrument, and it kind of stuck.
And you do it well. We listened to everything. We did not just listen to one thing, because at that time, everything was played on the radio. It wasn't, okay, this radio station is labeled as this, and this one is all rock, and
right.
It was everything. So it went from Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra to Elvis Presley to the Beatles to Motown. So we listened to everything.
That's pretty much how my household was also. And speaking of Motown, I think this is a great opportunity to talk about just the importance of the musicians in Motown, that particular period, and just acknowledge that many of those musicians that were the house band for those great Motown sessions, those were jazz musicians
and the most well-respected jazz musicians in Detroit.
Absolutely. And it's one thing that we don't really pay enough homage to.
The sad part is they did not get recording credits at all. It was like, come in, do the session, thank you, see you tomorrow. You know, the Marvelettes will be here tomorrow. You know? Let's get the tune down.
Yeah.
But the Funk Brothers came out of that in Detroit, and they were all amazing jazz musicians. Was it James Jamerson?
Absolutely.
Yes, and it's just too bad they didn't get the real recognition that they deserved.
Right.
I think the first time that the Funk Brothers actually got a recording credit was on Marvin Gaye's 1971 album, What's Going On.
Wow.
And they'd been playing at Motown since the late 50s.
Wow, yeah.
So, well overdue.
Speaking of Marvin Gaye, what was your first recollection of listening to any of his works?
Oh boy, I think I must have been in the 8th grade. And my favorite song at that time was Ain't That Peculiar.
He was such a leading force in the civil rights music.
Absolutely.
Civil rights movement, I should say. And what are some of your thoughts about like the work that he did? One of many people, I'm thinking of Stevie Wonder around that time, also Aretha Franklin being very vocal about that. What are some of your thoughts about?
You know, this has been an ongoing thing. Jazz is protest music. Black music is protest music. And it's always been at the forefront because we want to be heard. So it didn't matter whether it was Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit about the horrors of lynching to, I'm trying to think of his name right now, Max Roach doing We Insist, Freedom Now, he and Sonny Stitt and Abby Lincoln, to Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. We've always had something to say, and basically, we just want to be heard.
Right.
We want our voices heard, and it comes through in the music, and the music is about our experience as Black people.
It always seems like, in my head, that it's been an extra burden that many Black musicians have had to be a part of, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly, because our rights were the ones that were most in jeopardy.
Absolutely.
As opposed to people of color. And it's just, to me, it's a sign of true strength that amidst all of the things and the turmoil that was going on, especially in the 50s and the 60s, that they were still able to provide and produce such uplifting music during that time, even while, you know, like basic human rights were being downgraded or even not acknowledged as equal.
Absolutely. Well, you know, that's something that's always been going on. That has been our strength as a people. The only thing we did have was our music.
Right.
You know, from being enslaved, we didn't have anything else. Most of the time, we didn't even have a name.
Right.
So we've always just had our music, and that music was the strength that we've carried on to now, to this day, that pushes us forward.
Do you think that this continuation of music and black music and using our vehicle as black musicians, do you think that this burden continues even to this day?
Oh, absolutely. It's really sad to say that, honestly, not much has changed, except for the population. It's becoming more diverse. We have many more people of color living in this country. And so having that change in demographics is what's driving the change now.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep pushing until we actually have people listening to us, and not just listening and saying, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I hear you. Excuse me. Now what was I talking about?" But actually wanting to make change and wanting to learn about our history. So we're going to just keep on protesting, whether it's musically, out in the streets, whatever it is, until we get our voices heard, and not just being heard, but there's some action that's going on.
Yeah, and to me, I think just now, within, let's say, the past 3 years or so, there's finally been some ears, metaphorically, opening up to that point where I think musicians are no longer just able to perform their music and then be done with it. Now, I think more often people want to actually speak to why their music is important and use it as maybe a stepping stone for other types of ways in which that they can make positive change into society.
Oh, I agree. I agree completely. What do you think can be done to create more diversity in music, whether not just classical or jazz? What do we need to do to see more people of color involved in this American culture of music, which is all of it comes back to black music? But what do you think we can do?
Well, one thing that you mentioned the last time we spoke was it starts really early on. So it starts in the schools, and it starts with making sure that people at a young age have access to good music education, and also good access to seeing people that look like them
Absolutely.
playing all kinds of music. And I think that's probably one thing that most black musicians share, is that at some point they witnessed someone that looks like them doing something, and a light bulb popped up into their head and said, "Oh, so I can maybe do that," or "I have an interest in doing that." What about you? What do you think?
I think we have to start young. The difference now with the kids growing up and our families is that everybody's in their little own individual space. So people don't listen to music together. You know, when you go home, everybody's got their own little iPad or their phone, and they're in their own little universe, whatever that might be. And so the only way they can, or the best way, I shouldn't say the only way, the best way for these kids to get exposed to different kinds of music would be at schools.
Right.
And we have to teach them different things and teach it different ways, not just the way it was done 50, 60 years ago.
The thing that I think is encouraging is that because we are living in a much more diverse society, I think people now are listening to a much broader range of music, whereas, when I was like in middle school or high school, it was really hard you were kind of outcast if you listened to other styles of music other than what your buddies were listening to. So I was definitely the weirdo because I loved jazz music, but I also loved classical music, and I also loved Public Enemy and Run DMC and LL Cool J. And I think if I were at that age now, I think that would be totally approved upon. And you could find a whole bunch of people that were interested in all of these things. And I think that's refreshing.
It is refreshing. I started off playing violin, and then I went to viola. And it was because I saw African American people at my church playing these instruments.
Wow.
And then when the school would go to hear the Denver Denver Symphony, I could see this whole group of violins and strings, and I'm just thinking, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, the schools at that time, if your parents could not afford an instrument, they had one for you.
Yep.
And that's different now,
That's
too.
very different now.
We don't have the classes available anymore. We don't have instruments available anymore. So young people of color who don't have the means to take private lessons or go out and buy or even rent an instrument, they're just kind of left out.
Right, yeah. A similar thing happened with me because when I was in the 6th grade, there was a need for an oboist. And so I played the oboe from 6th grade until 9th grade.
Wow, that's one of my favorite instruments, by the way.
Oh, good. I'll play mine sometime. You'll change your mind. But the band director had an oboe for me to play, and so he said, "Well, I know that you play saxophone, but would you mind playing oboe?" And I said, "Sure, why not? It looks like a cool instrument." And my first oboe teacher was a black man. He was actually.
I'm sorry.
He was actually a retired band director at the HBCU in Houston, Texas.
Wow.
He used to teach and run the band program at Texas Southern University. And he owned a little mom and pop music store in my neighborhood.
Love it.
And he really never ever charged me for lessons. Like I went there with my mother to buy oboe reeds because I couldn't make reeds at the time. And he said, "Oh yeah, so you play oboe, huh?" And I said, "Well, I'm just starting to learn." And he just said, "Well, do you study with anyone?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, tell you what, come here next week, bring your oboe, bring your book, and we'll work on this stuff together." Wow. And I took lessons with him for 3 years.
That's fantastic.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah, all of our teachers in elementary school, I shouldn't say all of them, most of them were African American.
Wow.
Yeah. I still remember Miss Brewster. She was the choir teacher, and she didn't play. You came in and you sang. I mean, I'm talking about being in 3rd grade and singing the Hallelujah chorus, from the Messiah. It's like, serious stuff.
Yeah.
And it had to be memorized.
What grade was this?
3rd. So it's like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And then our band director, Mr. Devers, he was black.
Yeah.
And I remember they needed more violas, and that's a similar situation. Hey, do you want to play viola instead of violin? Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they had the instruments available.
Right.
And it was great seeing these people that I could relate to. And they were serious about the music.
Oh, I'm sure.
Very serious.
Very serious.
And we had to come correct, as they say.
A question I have for you is, how have social justice movements coincided with black music?
We is black music.
Right.
Social movements, this is how we speak. And I think I was looking at something yesterday. Well, let me just back up. We've always been part of we are the social movement, it seems. It just never seems to go away. And it seems that is one way that we express ourselves when something horrible or some huge injustice is happening. Well, what do? We create chants. We create music, beats that go with that. I think Kendrick Lamar put out something called All Right, that people were chanting for the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not sure exactly where they were doing this. I think it could have been across the country after George Floyd's death, but that became an anthem. We take the lyrics of the songs that are given us, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, Kendrick Lamar, All Right, We Gonna Be All Right, and we put that in. It energizes us to keep trying to make change. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense to me.
Yeah, they just go hand in hand,
Yeah.
social movements with black music. It's all about our experience and what we're trying to deal with and what we're trying to change.
Yeah, I would say, you mentioned that we are the social movement. I would also say we are the cultural movement also.
Yes.
Because many of the cultural differences, I mean, we can look at any commercial on TV right now and see an impact that black music and black culture, the way that we dress, the way that we talk, the way that we interact with one another, the beats, like you mentioned, all of that stuff is directly coming from black culture. Black culture is American culture.
It is.
And, we talked about the Super Bowl that just took place Sunday, and just witnessing that whole show, which had Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre,
Mary J. Blige,
50 Cent hanging upside down.
What?
That was a thing. Anderson .Paak was on drums, and just thinking how far we've come to the point where those musicians, those artists 30 years ago were not considered a part of mainstream society.
Exactly.
And now they are literally on the biggest American stage that there is and performing. And on the field, you had Crip dancers. Yeah, I mean, you had dancers doing the Crip walk.
I'm sorry I missed this.
No, yeah,
See, that's what I get for being a working musician.
You have to see this.
My gosh.
It was to me a very surreal thing, but also a pretty cool thing to see, and it just signifies where we are in society now. Also,
Well, that music, you have to say, every last one of those musicians who were up there, they're at the top of their game, and collectively, not to mention individually,
right,
they have a huge fan base.
Right.
Everybody knows the words, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're black, you're white, whatever. You're rapping along with them.
Right.
So that's good ratings for the Super Bowl. And plus, it's a great opportunity for this music to be heard and seen. I do have my concerns, though, that is this a one-off? Oh yeah, it's Black History Month.
Right.
So hey, let's do that. And I do wonder how much of this is because of the allegations or accusations about racial discrimination and their poor record of hiring black head coaches. So while I applaud
absolutely, yeah,
this whole beautiful, exclusive black halftime spectacle, I have to wonder, is that it? Okay, we made amends Everybody good?
Right, right. You have every right to be cynical because we've seen the history, and the
Yes.
history will.
And it keeps repeating itself.
It keeps repeating itself, right? And I have the same questions about how we in society will do the same thing, right? Like we have had 2 years plus at this point of a pandemic, and we've had basically the same period of time in which there's been very strong political and social unrest. You mentioned George Floyd. I mean, there's probably a list of 30 people that have been either murdered or brutalized by people in power, such as police. And it's very easy to say this is awful and this is terrible, but let's just keep it moving. Like, we will acknowledge that this is bad, and we will do what is prudent right now for covering our butts, but
and
then
as soon as it dies down,
yes.
let's go back to business as usual.
Exactly, and I think
Yeah.
that's where Black musicians and Black artists can come into play, as we've done for decades now, which is to remind people that this is still ongoing and the struggle is still ongoing
It's
as
real.
well. And we have musicians going back to Charles Mingus with Fables of Faubus, to Sonny Rollins with the Freedom Now suite, Marvin Gaye we've mentioned, but Stevie Wonder, Prince, I'm thinking all of these musicians, hip hop artists that still will kind of remind us, or just like pester the society at large. No, we're not going to let you, push this aside. This is still at the forefront.
Yeah, and we have to keep it up.
Yep, absolutely.
We have to, and it's really important to me.
We can get really down into the X's and O's of like the analysis of music, and we lose sight of the bigger picture, which is how is this going to connect with an audience, and who
Yes.
are we writing this music for, which is the audience. We're not necessarily writing it for other musicians. And I think that one thing that I know that you do such a great job of is putting perspective into the minds of your students about the importance and the reactions that good music will have on others. And I think that's something that should be, I don't know, shared more often with music educators, not just
I think they forget. Why did you start playing music in the first place?
Right.
We forget about the heart of the music, and we get so involved in the technical, like you said, the X's and the O's and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Where is the heart in the music? And who are we doing this for? If you're going to be a performing artist, or you're going to do arranging or composing, it's for someone else.
Right.
It's not about you. And to me, it's so important that we keep the heart and soul of the music front and center. We have to be able to share this music. People will listen if you tell them a good story.
Absolutely.
They will listen, and that really encompasses instrumental music. I have found that sometimes young, especially young, I was one of those too. How fast can I sing this tune? How fast can I play this riff? Can I, just trying to show off your chops. But you don't really know what the song is about or who wrote it. You don't know the lyrics, and that's what I'm really trying to get people to wake up to. Let's really analyze what the song is about.
Yeah, sincerity is a big deal. It's one thing. You reminded me of John Coltrane, and he went through several periods, but he always knew how to connect with an audience. He played the most esoteric, avant-garde music, and he had people following him.
Well, Jason, moving forward from a diversity standpoint, What excites you about where the music is going?
I'm really.
Where is it going anywhere?
No, I would like to think it's going someplace. If not, I'm going to be out of a job soon. A couple things that immediately comes to my mind is I'm very excited and encouraged that now we are looking for people other than the default, which has typically been white male composers, performers, artists. And I like the fact that as a society and as a culture, we are now more open to hearing music by women as not only vocalists, but like instrumentalists and composers. That's very, very important and very exciting to me. We are now finally starting to acknowledge composers of color, old and new, Black composers as well. And just the fact that places that have been closed off for women and people of color are now feeling the pressure to open their doors, their performance halls for these people, and not have it as a gimmick or a one-off thing like we mentioned before, but an honest, sincere opening and acknowledgement that women can write music too.
Hello.
And gay and lesbian and bisexual composers are studied and musical as well.
Exactly.
So that's really encouraging to me.
I agree with you. And again, getting back to the whole population, the demographic is changing.
Right.
And in order to, and they're open, as we talked about, to listening to all kinds of things. Well, we have to serve that audience. And so this is going to be great because they want to hear something other than what their great grandparents listened to.
Right.
So yeah, I'm encouraged. I'm excited in the same way that you are.
And you know what's also exciting is the performers themselves that are members of symphony orchestras. They're kind of tired of playing the old stuff as well.
Yay!
So
I'm sorry. We like the old stuff.
not knocking the old stuff, but
no, not at all. We played it.
Yes, we played it. There's other music out there, and I think that is a refreshing thing that the actual performers want this music out there as well. So that's a really cool feeling to see that.
It's going to be wonderful. I do know that, and I hope I live long enough that I can see everything kind of turn around. You know, not that I'm old, people. But I'm eager to see, especially what our kids here are doing.
Exactly.
Because they are so talented and so exceptional.
Well, Clairdee, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Thank you. We have to do this again.
I'm sure we will.
Okay.
Without cameras.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clairdee.